We're going to introduce you to some waxes you can use to make your model. This first group is sculpture wax. It's a soft wax that you can kind of work like clay. It is sensitive to the temperature, so if the room is cold, you might want to hold it in your hands or rub it in your hands to make it a little bit softer. These are extruded waxes and sheet wax. The extruded wax are extruded into a bunch of different shapes. You have round wire, half round wire, tubes, etc. Then you have the carving wax. It is hard. You can machine it, you can file it, saw it, and remove material. It's kind of like working with plastic. Now you can use a wax gun, which is like a glue gun, with these little wax rods to draw, sculpt, dribble into water. You can have a lot of fun with these. Now these waxes are a mixture. You have sprue wax, which we'll go into later. We have injection wax, we have buildup wax or relief wax, we have touch-up wax, and sticky wax. They all kind of have their own purpose. They can be used on top of the other waxes or used to glue the other waxes together. You can mix and match all of these waxes to fit your need. Now you can use almost anything to be a tool for carving wax. You can make your own tools, you can buy tools, you can repurpose tools. But in this studio, we have some wax tools for you. We have dental tools, wolf carving tools, files, saws. Fingers work really well for the sculpture wax and for the wire wax, the extruded wax. I'm happy to help out when you start making your model, point out some of the tools that aren't in this picture. We use wax pens to melt wax, to weld wax. We have a couple different styles here in the studio, and they live in the drawers near all the waxes. You want to set it to different temperatures for different things, use different tips for different size pieces or different textures. Now once you've made a model, and it can be made out of any of these waxes, we're going to have to do some spruing. Spruing holds your piece in place when you invest it. It allows the wax to exit the mold, and it allows the metal to enter the mold. Now there are a lot of different size or gauge sprue waxes, and you want to choose the appropriate size for your piece. And I would be happy to help you with that when you're ready to sprue. Now that I've chosen a sprue wax gauge, I need to attach it to my piece. A couple of tips: I would shorten the sprue wax so that you're not trying to hold this long stick while the wax cools, because it takes a little bit of time, and if you move, it won't attach properly. There are lots of ways to sprue. You can sprue on a tree, you can sprue in place. For right now, I just want you to try and weld the sprue wax onto your piece. You want to make sure that you have a nice seal all the way around, no recessed areas, no gaps or holes, and you want to make sure that you let it cool as you work with it, or it'll fall off. Now let's sprue something else. Again, you choose the gauge sprue wire that you need so that it'll deliver enough metal to fill your piece in a timely manner. Now, sometimes you don't want to have this round wire stuck onto your piece, so you can flatten it if that suits the design better, if it's easier to hide that or repair that once you've cut it off in metal. By flattening it, you're not decreasing the amount of metal that is traveling through it, you're just changing the shape of the corridor that it's traveling through. Now I'm going to cut off this sprue wire so that it's not so long. I can get a really nice seal. I'm going to add a little wax if I need to, let it cool in between each melting. Holding it all in one hand, it's a little easier to keep them together while it's cooling. Now I'm going to fix this little undercut you can see on the side. You can tell that there's a little recess area, and you don't want that while you're spruing. When the plaster fills that gap and the wax is gone and the hot metal rushes in, it can break off those little protruding pieces of plaster, and it will mix with your metal and end up, usually in the worst place possible, in your cast piece, embedded in the metal. If you have more than one item that you want to put in the same flask, you can build a tree. This is one way to do it. If you have two items, you can just weld these two sprue waxes together, giving each piece a little bit of room. You want to make sure that the weld is nice and smooth and that you don't have any recesses, gaps, or undercuts. Once your piece is sprued, you will weigh it. You'll want to find out the weight in grams of your sprued piece. Once your piece is sprued to a tree, or if you're casting it by itself on a sprue, you want to put it onto the base of your flask. Now, the base is just a rubber cup that you put on your flask, which is just a cylinder of steel, and it keeps the plaster in while it's in liquid form. Now, the base has a rubber button that has a little hole in the center that's usually filled with wax. You want to make sure that it is actually full and not empty down in the bottom. You want to kind of melt it a little bit, and if you can, just stick your sprue in. Once it is secure and cool enough that it's not falling over, you want to fill any of the air gaps that may have been left on the sides. You can use another piece of sprue wax to fill those holes. You really don't want any air bubbles. You also want to be sure to have a nice smooth transition. Think of it as the metal's going to be flowing through there, and you want it to be a very flow-friendly transition. If you have any bottleneck or areas that would restrict the metal flow, now is the time to fill them with a little excess wax. Before you put the flask on your base, show it to the instructor to make sure that it looks like it's going to work. When you do put the base on the flask, you want to be very careful that you don't hit your piece, slip and hit your piece and knock it off the base. If you gently get one side in, you then can work the rubber up over the base until it slips in. We then have you tape the tops of your flasks so that there will be no overflow. At this time, we also have you label it with your name, metal, and wax weight. Then it's time to invest. You'll head over to this area and we will demo the investing. You use a vacuum table, and a high temperature plaster to create the mold. Once you've made your investment, you pour it into your flasks, and now your pieces are encased in investment. We will load these in the kiln once they are ready, and it will burn out overnight. The wax will burn out, and it will be a hollow void waiting for the metal. When you come back for casting, you will remove the hot flasks from the kiln and put them in the centrifugal caster. Once you've melted your metal, you will release the spin and it will force the metal into your flask. The plaster is then removed and you have a metal version of your sprued wax.